I'd like to applaud the Trump administration, President Trump's administration, for their pro-peace agenda, especially in Eastern Europe. The Russia-Ukraine war has been a humanitarian tragedy where millions have died and been displaced, and ending it is a noble cause. The book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 9, reminds us, quote, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." I do worry that any peace deal that is predicated solely on U.S. security guarantees would do more harm than good in the long run for America's national interests. America should continue to motivate Europe to take primary responsibility for European security. Instead, NATO expansion has essentially compelled Americans to serve as the European Défense Force. This is not healthy or sustainable. President Trump tried to call attention to it in his first term. We've seen tragic consequences for Europe not paying attention to their own security. So I'd like to say, why is President Trump administration's recently published national security strategy not only right for America's national security, but also right for Europe? Mr. Walker?
So I think there's little disagreement that Europe should and needs to invest more in its own security. That's not mutually exclusive of working more closely with Europe, I would argue, at the same time. If we look at the countries in Europe that have been subjected to Russian aggression over the last 2 decades, it's been those that have been outside of NATO. Vladimir Putin clearly has an interest in the Baltic states, but hasn't seen fit to attack them yet. He has seen fit to attack Ukraine and Georgia, both of which have had ambitions to join NATO, but have been denied that option. And in every case, the countries who have joined NATO have done so voluntarily. So I think this is part of a larger discussion about how we can achieve peace through strength, because Vladimir Putin understands strength.
Yeah, I do think he understands strength. I guess, do the Europeans understand it? Because it seems to me that the Europeans, as they expand their social state and undermine their own national security, that they feel like they just bought war insurance from the United States. And in fact, if you look at, Vice President Vance's speech in Munich, where he said, "What are we defending?" If you look in Western Europe, you've got people claiming political asylum in Eastern Europe, in places like Hungary, because they're being put in jail for free speech in England, in France, in Germany, and what used to be bedrock portions of Western civilization. So what are we defending? Is Europe basically deciding that to beat China, they should be more like China?
I would just chime in and say that I think we would all agree that for too long Europe has underinvested in its defense. And I think largely what we're seeing now is a broad step up in their support for taking care of themselves. I think at the end of the day, rogue revisionist regimes like Russia, like China, fear a collective response. They fear allied scale.
When you look at traditional defense spending there, but we're talking about hybrid warfare here. You look at supply chains, the Europeans are very dependent upon China. Their linkage to China has been very strong. They basically didn't want to do trade deals with the United States because they wanted to take the United States for granted and keep their deals with China. They didn't want to help in the negotiations with China, and frankly haven't aggressively. When you look at with respect to civil liberties, is Europe stronger because they've become more like China and they're putting people in jail for posting memes?
I think you mentioned Europe's dependencies on China. We're overly reliant on China.
We are, in fact, but the national security strategy addresses that in the United States. And when you look at speech, we've got colleagues, including one of the members here on the panel, that essentially wants to criminalize speech in the United States. Is Europe doing the right thing in hybrid warfare by just saying, no, we've got government people that'll take care of security. We'll just put you in jail if you say the wrong things?
I don't agree with those policies, but I would state that at the end of the day, there's a lot more in common between Europe and the United States that divides us. And ultimately, the Chinese are going to exploit those dependencies and weaknesses. It's one thing to have it in a national security strategy. It's going to be another thing to translate that into concrete action of allied scale. And I think that's where the administration is going to have to focus its work for the next year.
I think that's exactly right. When you look at the trade policy, for example, that gets it. So I was glad to introduce last week a bipartisan effort to deal with biologics, limiting the export to China. and hopefully curtailing China's exploitation of that supply chain in the United States. Hopefully we'll have a panel talking about Arctic security. You see a lot of Europe and America coming together in the Arctic. But the bad actor, the real bad actor, is China in particular. So if you look at China's influence, they're not just in Europe. There is, if someone said it's like humidity, but from Greenland to Tierra del Fuego, they're in the Western Hemisphere, and the national security strategy gets that right.